Welcome back to Heritage and Hope Ministries. Today we're tackling one of the most talked about issues in the global economy, Central Bank Digital Currencies, or CBDCs. Our guest, Eva Thompkins, is an attorney who, after 2 decades in law, moved into the financial markets. Her work in digital finance, asset tokenization, and regulation has given her an insider's perspective about how these technologies are reshaping our economy and how they may one day affect our freedoms. We'll look at the global push for CBDCs and what's happening here in the US, and we'll step back to see the bigger picture through the lens of Bible prophecy. Could this be laying the groundwork for Revelation 13's no buy, no sell warning? We're not here to spread fear, but to inform, encourage, and stay watchful. Most of all, we want to remind you that God has not left his people without hope. While the systems of this world rise and fall, his word remains true and his promises never fail. So stay tuned. This conversation is eye-opening and full of timely insights. Welcome back to the studio, guys. Today we are excited to have Eva Thompkins join us. We're going to be talking about central bank digital currency. I'm joined in the studio here with Aaron, one of our co-hosts, and Brian and Michael, who joined us for previous episodes. So, Eva, thank you very much for joining us. It's really a pleasure to have you on to discuss central bank digital currencies. Can you kind of introduce yourself, your background, how it relates to blockchain, to central bank digital currency, to what ministries you're affiliated with, that type thing?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. So my name's Eva Thompkins, and I'm an attorney. I've been an attorney since I was admitted to practice in New York in 1998. And so I've been practicing in New York. I left the practice of law after about 20 years. I practiced law for 20 years, and then I went into participate in the financial markets. So that's how I get to see what the central banks are doing. In my work as a lawyer, if I was still in that field, if I was still practicing law the way that I was, I wouldn't have any idea what these central banks were doing because I didn't need to know. It didn't impact my job at all. But when I participate in the financial markets, the banks move the markets. The central banks set interest rates. Everything they do to affect the markets. So I'm always monitoring them and watching them and seeing what their movements are.
Right.
And so I was raised Adventist. I grew up Adventist. But I both left the church and then came back to the church during the pandemic after being out of the church for about 33 years. And it was all because of the Revelation prophecies.
Mm.
When I was 16 years old, sitting in church with my family, I did not believe the Revelation prophecies because my track was I was going to law school. I knew that from the 7th grade. I just wanted to go to law school and be a lawyer. And I was very familiar with our Constitution and our constitutional rights, particularly our First Amendment rights, and I cherish them. And I could not see how in these United States, the Revelation prophecies could come true. I couldn't understand how they could stop you from buying or selling.
Right.
Especially if we had cash. And back then, when I was 16 years old with my family, we barely had debit cards, Yeah. There were debit cards and credit cards, but, people use cash quite a lot, much more than they do today.
Right.
So I drifted away from the church in college. I came back during the pandemic because of what I was seeing happening with central bank digital currencies, in part because of what I saw them doing with central bank digital currency. And as soon as I saw that, and I saw the central banks doing this big push in 2020, 2021, 2022 towards central bank digital currency, all the central banks around the world were making this big push towards it. When I looked into it, I said, oh, this is it's the perfect framework. It's the perfect tool that Satan would use to prevent you from buying or selling.
Yeah.
When I was sitting in church with my family as a 16-year-old, I could not understand how they could prevent you from buying or selling. With central bank digital currency, it's fully programmable, fully traceable, fully surveillable, and fully seizable digital currency. They literally could program an algorithm to prevent you from buying or selling whatever it is they didn't want you to buy or sell. And with AI, they can micromanage you down to the individual person. So if you're behaving better than someone else, you won't lose the right to buy or sell. But if you are doing things the government doesn't want you to do, saying things on social media the government doesn't want you to say, or misbehaving as the government will see it, or saying things that are unfavorable to the government, they could easily, just with a line of code, prevent you from buying or selling with central bank digital currency.
Do you feel like they use the pandemic to kind of sneak in the framework for that? Is that essentially how that worked?
Yes. Yes. That was the really big push when the World Economic Forum was saying we're going to have a big reset. And they talked about the Great Reset.
Right.
Klaus Schwab's
Schwab.
book, The Great Reset. There was even a slogan that was out there on YouTube and then taken down that said, "It's 2030. You'll own nothing and be happy."
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep,
I remember
seen
seeing
that.
that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they weren't kidding.
And they weren't hiding it.
Yep. Exactly.
So this was definitely played into that. And all the central banks around the world, if you look at some websites, there's 2 websites that track it. CBDCtracker.org tracks it, I think, the best. You can see all the central banks around the world, which represent about 98% of global GDP, are moving in some stage towards a central bank digital currency. The AtlanticCouncil.org also has a CBDC tracker, so you could look at theirs as well and compare the two, but they both have very similar maps of how these countries are moving towards central bank digital currency. So this is what really, I just had a passion for getting involved in this. And my ministry is Revelation 13:17 cbdcwatch.substack.com, because I really see this as a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And I also work with the Wisdom Pearl as well. That's another ministry that I work with, which is run by my sister and her ministry partner, Ivan Rosh.
Oh, very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
So can you kind of define for me, because I am a little bit naive to all of this, because this is definitely not my specialty. How do you define, like, what is a central bank versus, like, I mean, is Truist a central bank? Is Bank of America a central bank? Or are you talking something bigger than that? Like, again, if you're not in the economic sector a lot, I guess I'm naive to all these type things.
Sure. A central bank, there's typically one per country or one per economic union.
Okay.
So the Federal Reserve is our central bank in the United States.
Okay.
In Europe, it's the European Central Bank. The countries before the European Union came about, they had their own central banks. But since the European Union, all those countries joined the Union, now they're governed by one central bank, which is the ECB, the European Central Bank. So Norway has a central bank, the UK has a central bank, the Bank of London, or the Bank of England, rather, is the central bank in the UK. The Bank of Japan is the central bank there. The Bank of China is the central bank in China. So all of these countries have their own central bank. And a central bank's job is to basically set interest rates. They're not supposed to interfere too much with monetary. They set monetary policy and set interest rates. They're not supposed to impose on the fiscal side, which in our country, Congress sets fiscal policy through their laws and through their committees and such. So the central bank is really just supposed to set the monetary policy, regulate interest rates, watch the money supply, and make sure that the dollar doesn't crash, essentially.
Okay. So is there a central bank that is over the central banks then?
Yes, there is.
And which one is that?
That is the Bank for International Settlements. And that was started after World War II to basically govern how money around the world was going to work after World War II.
Okay.
After Germany, was going to be brought back in, after Hitler was going to be prosecuted and all that and such.
Is there any tie-in with the United Nations?
They're not tied. They're not subject to anyone.
Okay.
They are really sovereign. They're their own country. They're their own entity. They set the rules for themselves. They don't obey any law by any country or any other organization. Wow. The Bank for International Settlements really is sovereign. There's a very good book called The Tower of Basel, because the Bank of International Settlements, its headquarters is in Basel, Switzerland.
Okay.
So it has a tower. Their headquarters looks like a tower. It's very reminiscent of the Tower of Babel. If you look at that Bible story, it's very similar to that. It's
there's no irony there at all.
Right.
Yeah.
No connection whatsoever.
Wow.
But so the Bank for International Settlements is made up of, they govern all the central banks. They are above the central banks, and they are supposed to facilitate cross-border settlements and such. But it's really a club for the central banks. And it's owned by, I want to say 63 central banks. I'm not really sure about that number, but they're owned by a number of the central banks that are members, including the New York Fed and the Federal Reserve are owners of the Bank for International Settlements.
So basically, the Federal Reserve is essentially working on a digital currency, is essentially what I'm gathering. How does that digital currency differ from Bitcoin or Ripple or Ethereum or any of the other cryptos out there? I mean, is a digital currency a crypto by default, or what is it?
So there's digital currency is really is a large umbrella for all types of currency that is digital, basically.
Okay.
So CBDC is a type of digital currency. Stablecoins are a part of a type of digital currency. Cryptocurrency is a type of digital currency. Stablecoins are a type of cryptocurrency, but they're very different from cryptocurrency in that their value is tied one-to-one to some asset, whether that's a dollar or gold or something such
Oh,
as
okay.
that.
Interesting.
Right. So there's dollar-backed stablecoins such as Tether, USDT, and Circle, USDC. Tether is by far the largest stablecoin, the most widely used. It has over 400 million users around the world. It's actually the vast majority of its reserves and backing up that stablecoin is U.S. Treasuries. And they are the fourth largest buyer of U.S. Treasuries, and they are the 17th or 18th largest holder of U.S. Treasuries. So that's digital currency. It's this big umbrella for all of these things. Central bank digital currency would be currency issued by the central bank directly
Okay.
to citizens or customers. There's two different types of central bank digital currency. There's wholesale, which is central bank digital currency that's passed between institutions, financial institutions.
Okay.
And then there's retail central bank digital currency, and that would be digital currency issued by the central bank directly to the citizen, to the person, the individual.
So how does this help enact a no buy no sell specifically? I mean, what's the nitty gritty of that? If this is implemented, because you have certainly online digital transactions that are occurring currently that they could easily turn off. I mean, they could turn off your MasterCard or Visa if they wanted to.
Correct.
You could easily stop that. Most of the things that we buy is off Amazon.com. I mean, you can easily freeze online assets, but what in particular makes this more dangerous than the power that they already have?
So the danger of central bank digital currency is that because it's issued by the central bank and it's controlled by the central bank, they can monitor all your transactions in real time and tax you accordingly. They can prevent you from using the currency by it's programmable, fully programmable. And it's that programmability aspect that allows them to be able to choose whether or not you could use that currency for any particular transaction. And they can see your transactions in real time. They could tax you accordingly. They could institute negative interest rates, which would be a deduction from your account, actually. So when you have a bank account and you have positive interest rates, and then it's an interest-bearing account, you get money comes into your account. With negative interest rates, money leaves your account. It's periodically deducted from your account rather than being added to your account. So they could do that with central bank digital currency. They really can program it so that you can't use it. They can basically constrain you as the user in any way they wish to constrain you.
Absolute
Financially.
control.
Absolute control. Absolutely. There is one of the most brilliant economists in the world. His name is Professor Richard Werner. He is a lecturer at Oxford. He's the father of the quantitative easing model that we've used for decades and have been used. It's been used for decades around the world for central banks around the world, not just the Federal Reserve. So he describes what we've been using. Like you said, we use credit cards, we use debit cards. He describes that as BDC, bank digital currency.
Okay.
He said, and that's worked very well for a very long time. There's not a problem with settlement of transactions.
Right.
The difference between CBDC is the central planners would have the control. But the banks really could, in a digital system where you're only using digital money, bank digital money, or digital currency, cryptocurrency, they can really, anyone could shut off anyone who has control over that particular currency that you're using. If it's digital in any form, they have the control to turn it off. So Bank of America could tell you, you can't use your credit card on these particular products if they want to. They haven't done that. The major banks and commercial banks in this country have never done that before. But certainly they could, because the products that we buy have codes attached to them.
Mm.
And if you didn't have access to cash, they really could control what you could buy or sell. But they've never done that. Central bank digital currency, the central bank would be able to control what you buy or sell. And so Richard Werner, another interesting thing he says is that he calls it's not even money, it's permissioned money. Because in that instance, when you would want to use this CBDC to buy something, you would need the agreement of the central bank that you should buy that item in that particular amount for that particular price and in that particular location and at that particular time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really permissioned money.
You mentioned earlier that the CBDCs can be programmed.
Correct.
So has there been any? Does it look like the governments are wanting to, or sort of showing any interest in programming it in any of these ways that you're speaking of? Let's say, for instance, if they wanted to put a use by date on your money, like your paycheck, or so that you can or you cannot use this money to support this religious organization or political organization, whatever it may be. Does it look like the governments are sort of heading in that direction, like in the language, in the legal terms of the CBDC?
It's in the code.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically in the code. And there was actually a leak in Brazil. Brazil publicized the code that they were looking at in their pilot project for the digital real, which is the name of their digital currency. And a developer looked at it and saw and reported to a reporter that in the code, the central bank had the ability in the code to increase or decrease your balance, freeze your account at will for any reason. I mean, it was right there in the code. They've not done that yet. And in few places, a CBDC has actually launched. So in China, it's been launched. They still call it a pilot program, but that's because it has low adoption and they're a bit embarrassed by that. So they still call it a pilot program, but they've been using digital yuan, their digital currency, for some time now. And they do have a lot of restrictions as to what they can do with their currency. India's had a pilot program going. They're trying to get people to use this currency. So they haven't shown their cards yet as to how they're going to control you or how they would control you, but it's in the code. They have the ability to do it.
So if CBDCs are able to be monitored, controlled, manipulated, how does that contrast to like cryptocurrencies, which are, not, well, I'm assuming they're not tracked or they're not monitored. Are those like a lifeline to, if in comparison to CBDCs, or how does that work?
So cryptocurrency, it's different in that it's voluntary. You can buy crypto if you want to, or you can choose not to buy crypto if you want to. You can buy Bitcoin, you could buy Ethereum, you could buy any XRP, any of the cryptocurrencies that are out there if you want to. They're quite volatile because their value is all over the place because of this. But you don't have to. But you're not, unless it's a particular privacy coin. There's a couple of privacy coins out there that make your transactions private or claim to. And one of them is Monero. I can't remember the other one. But most cryptocurrencies, they're not necessarily private. The issuer of the cryptocurrency can see all your transactions. They're they're fully trackable and traceable. They're fully transparent. Even with Bitcoin, people assume that with Bitcoin, they can't see what you're buying. That's not true. That you can see the transactions that are going through with Bitcoin on the blockchain. And it's the same thing with other cryptocurrencies, unless it's a specific privacy coin.
So do you see there being another pandemic or black swan event or some sort of global event that kind of forces people towards the CBDC and into that government control using like a social credit score controlled by AI? Is that kind of the big picture of what you're seeing come together, the framework of that?
Certainly, the World Economic Forum has said that.
Yeah.
I believe it was in 2023. The managing director of the World Economic Forum, Jeremy Jurgens, had given a talk or a speech, and he had said that he expected by the end of 2025 or 2024, I can't remember which year he said, that there would be a global cyber attack. There would be a global cyber event. So the World Economic Forum was forecasting that. That hasn't actually happened yet.
There's been multiple warnings about a big cyber attack.
Because you would have to have something like that to force people away from Bitcoin, for example, into the CBDC.
Right.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think it would have to be something so global
Right.
and so serious
Right.
that they would have to say, we have to watch the terrorists.
Right.
We can't let this happen again.
Right.
We have to take down the internet and we have to bring it back up. And then you will have to have like KYC protections. You have to know your customer if you want to access the internet or something like that. And then in that way, they could impose CBDC as a justification for fighting terrorism and fighting these people who, cause the cyber attack.
Right.
So I think that would be a good subterfuge to launch this type of thing if the central banks wanted to do that, if the Bank of International Settlements wanted to do that. The Bank of International Settlements has been pushing central banks around the world to come up with a central bank digital currency.
One of the things, kind of building off of your question there, Brian, that we kind of specialize here at Heritage and Hope. We kind of specialize in old documents and kind of affirming our Protestant heritage. But one of the other kind of interesting things that I got here not too terribly long ago was a couple of dollars right here. I put them in this laminated page just to kind of show people. But I have a couple marks here, German marks from 1919, I think is the first one. Or 1920, actually. And then the second one is from 1924. And the one from 1920 is 1 mark. And, that'd probably buy you a loaf of bread. And then if you look at the back, the second mark, it doesn't have any ink on the back. And it actually says 50 million marks. And this was printed 3 years after the first mark was printed. And so we know that there was that hyperinflation that took place, and that's basically how you get rid of a currency, is just devalue it into nothing. You print so much of it that it basically just becomes completely worthless. There were stories of people taking a wheelbarrow load of money to a shop to buy some food, and they'd go in the shop, leaving the wheelbarrow outside, and they'd come out and the load of money is dumped in the gutter, and somebody had stolen the wheelbarrow. Because it was literally worth so little. And the reason it was printed only on one side is because the ink itself was more valuable than the mark that they were printing. So they would just print it on one side to save ink. So, I know that we've had inflation that has increased in the last few years. If you look back, the buying power that you have with, $1 now you could have had back a few years ago for about 50 cents. So we have had, inflation increase significantly. But do you think that is how they're going to get rid of the dollar? Or do you think it's going to be, like you said, like more of like a terrorist type situation, or like we need this control, or all of it together? I mean, do you think we're primed for another hyperinflation crisis, I guess, is my question.
Well, so there's two things. So I think that the global cyber event or some sort of massive global event like that would be the justification for imposing CBDC on everyone. CBDC can't in and of itself save the US dollar, because it's basically fiat currency in a digital format.
Mm.
However, what they are doing to save the US dollar and to the dollar system and to preserve, I don't know if you've heard basically the word thrown around, de-dollarization. So de-dollarization is the concept that the other countries around the world don't like that we've basically weaponized the dollar over the years. You know,
Yeah,
we've
yeah, yeah.
imposed our will on other countries and we've threatened them with the dollar and with, tariffs and such and, everything. So the BRICS nations, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, India, China, Russia, they've gotten together and they've said, well, we're going to come up with our own digital currency and we're going to back it by gold and we're going to challenge the dollar. So that's been somewhat of a trend that's been moving, is de-dollarization. President Trump definitely doesn't want that to happen. And he said publicly, if the dollar were to lose its reserve status around the world, it would be like losing a world war. It would be the worst
Yeah.
thing that could possibly happen to
Yeah.
us. So their plan, which they've stated publicly through Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, through the Crypto Summit, they mentioned this. I think Howard Lutnick has talked about it. He's our Secretary of Commerce. Their plan is to use stable coins. So they get that nobody wants central bank digital currency.
Mm.
They get that. And so President Trump has said, we will not have a central bank digital currency in this country. And in his first week of office, he signed on January 23rd of 2025 an executive order prohibiting central bank digital currency. But that executive order also encourages, promotes, and supports the development of dollar-backed stablecoins. So like I mentioned earlier, dollar-backed stablecoins are like Tether. Tether's the largest dollar-backed stablecoin out there by far.
Okay.
And they're the fourth largest purchaser of U.S. Treasuries. And they are the 18th largest holder of U.S. Treasuries, more than some countries. So where our government was worried that countries have been dumping our treasuries. Japan has been dumping our bonds for years, just not buying them and selling them off. To fight de-dollarization, they're banking on stablecoins as to picking up that slack of buying U.S. Treasuries, and they are doing it. And so their plan is not to go with the CBDC. Their plan is to go with stablecoins. So a stablecoin can be issued by any private issuer. JP Morgan has its stablecoin called JPM Coin, and then they renamed it to Connexus. PayPal has a stablecoin, PYUSD. Visa's working on a stablecoin. All the major banks are working on a stablecoin. Tether is the most widely used stablecoin around the world. So, but stablecoins, people think of them as like the safe, free way out of this situation, but they're actually just as programmable, just as seizable, and just as surveillable as CBDC is. It's just that they're issued by private parties. So I anticipate that, such like we saw during the pandemic, where the government can't trample on your First Amendment rights, but private companies can.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Tech companies can.
Mhm.
Yeah, Facebook can do it.
Yep.
YouTube's still doing it. All these social media companies, Twitter, they can restrict your First Amendment rights. In the same way, stablecoins issuers can be used by the government to restrict whether or not we can buy or sell, just as easily, even actually more readily so, than if it were a CBDC coming out of our country anyways, because we have a constitution and we have these First Amendment freedoms that are guaranteed by the Constitution. But any private issuer can say, can restrict your spending, can freeze your coin, can freeze your tokens. They could do that and not trample the First Amendment in that way. So I think the government is going to, in a pandemic type situation, if we were to see that, if the government wanted to lock you in your homes, the government could put pressure on Tether or whatever stablecoin issuer you use to not allow you to use your coin outside of your 5-minute radius.
So, a question for you. So, for those of us who haven't really been watching what's been happening here in this CBD space, how far along the road are we? Like in your opinion, how likely is it that something like this could be rolled out in the next year or so?
Well, so on the CBDC side, our Fed has worked on a CBDC.
Mhm.
And when Jerome Powell was questioned about it in the last few years, he's always made statements like, we're not anywhere near launching a CBDC. You don't have to worry about it. We're not even thinking about CBDC. He would make statements like that in public, both when he was questioned before the Senate Banking Committee, any public statements he would make statements like that. But the truth is that the Boston Fed and MIT they pursued Project Hamilton, which was a multi-year exploratory research project. And they developed a code base called OpenCBDC that supports 1.84 million transactions per second, with most transactions closing in less than a second. That's magnitudes faster than what we know today with our credit cards and debit cards and such. So it's totally successful. Their testing was completely successful. That CBDC is sitting on the shelf if the government were to roll that out. But the government isn't going to roll that out, or at least this president is not going to roll that out. But it's sitting there and it's ready to go. It was extremely successful. Their testing was extremely successful. Interestingly enough, in the last 2 weeks, the Senate passed the Genius Act, and yesterday the House passed the Genius Act. And just before I came on here, I was watching President Trump in his signing ceremony signing the Genius Act. So what the Genius Act is, it's a bill to establish a regulatory framework for stablecoins. So this is one of President Trump's crypto bills to promote and support stablecoins, dollar-backed stablecoins. So interestingly, that's happened now. He just signed the Genius Act. According to the Genius Act, only permitted issuers may issue a payment stablecoin for use by U.S. persons. And there's going to be a regulatory framework, very strict anti-money laundering provisions in that act are going to be issued. And so that's happening. So they're really on this push towards stablecoins, really, really pushing stablecoins.
There's a quote here by Ellen White that she has in manuscript 114, 1899. She says, in India, China, Russia, and the cities of America, thousands of men and women are dying of starvation. The moneyed men, because they have the power, control the market. They purchase at low rates all they can obtain and then sell at greatly increased prices. This means starvation to the poorer classes and will result in a civil war. There will be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, and at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And she goes on. So she talks there about an economic crisis, and she talks about it leading to starvation even in the cities of America. And she also mentions a civil war. And of course, she wrote this in 1899. That's actually after the first Civil War. So we know that there will likely be another civil war based off of her statement. There will be another civil war. So, we see that the rich are able to buy and then they sell at greatly increased prices. Do you think that that is going to play into this economic upheaval that is going to go on right before the time of the end?
It very well could. It very well could. Yeah, especially if, if some of us citizens, we take a look at the pandemic. You had people who went around with the mainstream narrative, and then you had people who didn't, who fought against it. And those people who fought against it, they had a rough time. If we had another such global event where they wanted to restrict our rights, certainly there could be starvation. Interestingly enough, like what I do with my church, I've taught 2 foraging classes so far.
Oh, cool.
I refuse, unless I'm purposely fasting and praying, I refuse to be hungry. It's not going to happen. And God is growing food all around us. So I'm a big proponent of foraging because no one can take away your right to eat. If you can find green spaces, you can find things to eat. So there's that comfort. Hopefully that's a comfort to somebody. But we know Revelation 13:17 says at some point, if you don't have the mark of the beast, if you don't worship the beast, you will not be able to buy or sell. And my passion with my ministry is that I don't want to see anybody be lost because they're worried about their money or they're worried about their things. They're worried about their assets or they're worried about starvation. We should not be worried about that because number one, God's going to protect us. Number two, God's growing this food all around us as we speak now. Much of it extremely nutritious with medicinal properties and such like that. So I don't want anybody to be scared about that, but certainly there can be starvation if people are not prepared.
You mentioned that you had left the church, and then it was really what was happening in COVID that sort of woke you up to the truth of what was happening, and I found that really interesting because I've met quite a few people who had a similar experience, and so I'd like to ask you specifically because you growing up in the church, you had a pre-knowledge of some of these things which reawakened the interest in you. So how do you get this sort of information through to people who don't have the pre-knowledge and haven't had the upbringing of knowing about what the mark of the beast is or anything like that? How do you, because it sounds kooky, right? To a lot of people, it just sounds crazy. Our government wouldn't do that. But so how do you go about it, telling people?
Well, I do the best I can. I let the Holy Spirit lead me because they don't have the background that I had. And quite frankly, even with my background, I didn't believe that the government could do these things until we saw it during the pandemic. And when you talk to people, they get that. The pandemic woke up a lot of people and they get that they weren't allowed to go to, at least in many parts of the country, you weren't allowed to go to certain places. You weren't allowed to worship in church. You weren't allowed to go to certain stores. You were able to go to the grocery store, but that was pretty much it. Or you could go to a bar or a liquor store, but that was about it. Other stores, other businesses were shut down. So people see that and they're like, well, maybe what you're saying is not so kooky after all.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Our recent history, it's woken people up to that things could be very different in a heartbeat, in a flash. It was very quickly, all the nations around the world in lockstep shut things down, shut down the economies.
So do you run into a lot of people that are just hungry for this, and once you start explaining, it just puts everything together? It's kind of like the missing pieces.
Exactly. It starts to make sense to them. They're like, oh, okay, maybe I should learn more about this. What can you tell me?
Yep.
One of the things that we have here, I have an old book on the table because, again, we like to specialize in old books. So I don't know if you can see that or not.
Yes, I can.
But this book is actually several hundred years old, actually. This book is from the 1600s. It is a Sacrosancta Concilia. And if I flip it open, MDC LXXI, which is 1671, is when this book was published. It's a Sacrosancta Concilia, and it was written by Philippe Labbé and Gabriel Cossarth of the Society of Jesus. And so this is a Jesuit book that contains, it's actually a set of Jesuit books. We have, I think, like 18 of these. But anyway, in this old tome, we have a couple interesting statements, because this is basically a history book, and it talks about some of the councils, some of the decrees. One of the things that's fascinating here is that Rome has a history of using this tactic of limiting buying and selling. Here, there's a statement that says, "Neither let any commerce be held with them in selling and buying, that the comfort of humanity having been lost, they may be compelled to return from the error of their way." And this is in Latin, but I have the translation here in English. And then if I flip forward, there's another section that says, "Forbid under an anathema that any should presume to keep them in their houses or on their lands, sustain them, or transact any business with them. So, you see from hundreds of years ago that Rome historically has used the narrative of, okay, we'll make it really uncomfortable. We're going to make it hard for you. You can't buy, you can't sell. And so as Protestants, I think it's important to realize that there's a track record for this. This isn't some hypothetical. This has happened to our Protestant brothers and sisters from hundreds of years ago. And so when we see this warning in Revelation that's talking about the time of the end, it's going to get cranked up to 11 when that time comes. Aaron, what should our response be as Seventh-day Adventists, as Christians, when we start seeing this come about? What do we do to our neighbors? What do we do for ourselves? What do we do with the goods that we have? What do you think?
Hopefully this shouldn't be a surprise to any of us because, we've known about this, and hopefully we can, tell our friends and our neighbors before this happens so that they're aware of it and, continue to help them as well with what we can do. Because I think, God will bless us so that we can bless others as well, and that we can be there for them.
Do you think there's any parallels with Joseph? Do we have responsibility to be Josephs?
But he was faithful to God from when he was the head over all of Potiphar's house all the way to the dungeon. So, he went through multiple big downturns in his life, and yet he was faithful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just what Aaron was saying, the Bible, Jesus was, when he was telling the disciples what was going to happen, he said, I tell you these things before they come to pass, so that when they do come to pass, you may believe. For this is the purpose of prophecy, or one of the purposes of prophecy, is to establish our faith, knowing that what the Bible says is true, right? And so this topic, knowing this, the information here, is just not information just for the sake of information. It's so that we can use it to warn people, and so that, they may not hear us initially, but they may, when they see things happening, they may say, wow, I've heard about this. Somebody told me about this,
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Isn't it interesting that so many hundreds of years ago, these Jesuits knew the exact pain points that they could place on people to coerce their behavior or attempt to coerce their behavior?
Yeah.
I think we'll absolutely be seeing that again as it's prophesied in Revelation 13:17.
Yeah, so that leads me to another question. So Alex was talking about how, the Roman Catholic Church has, we'd read in the book there that they have a history of these things, as you just mentioned, as well. We understand this as Seventh-day Adventists because this is part of our beliefs. But without looking for evidence where there is no evidence, is there some trace that you can see where it leads to Rome? Like I said, I'm not looking for information or a trace of evidence where there is no evidence. We're not looking for to put the blame. But do you see any traces that, is the Vatican involved in, these World Economic Forums and whatever else?
Well, I don't have any direct evidence that Rome's involved and the Vatican's involved. The Vatican does have its own bank. I don't know if it has any accounts at the Bank of International Settlements or if it has any role at the Bank of International Settlements. So I can't say. When we look at things, we say, well, surely there must be, because Rome and the Vatican seems to be behind a lot of these things. But I don't have direct evidence, so I don't go ahead and say that. They may be working behind the scenes with the Bank of International Settlements. They may belong to the same high-level secret societies that plan these types of things. But I don't have any direct evidence of that.
Well, to somewhat answer your question there, I don't know if you've heard of the Council for Inclusive Capitalism. This is a combination of different businesses out there that are essentially aligning themselves with this council. And so you have really big names: Bank of America, Johnson & Johnson, BP, Verizon. They have, if you go on their website, you'll see the list of different leaders out there, and it is the who's who of business out there. Now, Is that specifically to deal with, blockchain currency? Not necessarily. But at the same time, they have their hands deeply in with the moneyed men of this world, essentially. And so will they have an influence? Absolutely.
I agree with that. There's also the money bloodlines, like the Rothschilds and stuff like that, who own many, many, many banks around the world.
Yeah.
So certainly that must tie into it as well.
Yeah,
I
of
agree.
course. And I think a reasonable question to ask is, what has a church got to do with banking firms? What what other church in the whole world has got so much to do with finances and banks?
No, exactly.
Yeah. What's the reason?
Well, if there is a no buy, no sell, and it has to do with the mark, and we know who the Antichrist power is, then clearly they have to be influencing the money. That all has to be tied together, and they're I believe tied together through secret societies. If you look in I don't know how much you've looked into the Federal Reserve and Jekyll Island and some of the meetings that happen there and those people involved and kind of the history there. It's very dark, so I don't know that we want to get into that here, but it all's tied into secret societies. And the Rothschilds that you mentioned, I mean, they are open Satanists.
For sure. Yep, I totally agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, we read in Revelation 18, verse 3, when it's talking about Babylon the Great, we read, "For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies." She's got her finger in every pie.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's right.
So, okay, kind of a couple final questions here before we kind of close out, unless you had any other thoughts. There's a statement here from Testimonies of the Church, Volume 5. "The time is coming when we cannot sell at any price. The decree will soon go forth prohibiting men to buy or sell of any man save him that hath the mark of the beast." How do we know when to get rid of the assets that we do have for the cause? Because, she talks about this. She talks about how basically when we see this really getting echoed in society and it's really it's ramping up and we're like, okay, we see this coming, it's time to dump assets. And at the same time, you hear this notion of tokenization of assets. Is there any way to quote unquote tokenize even your physical property? Is that a crazy notion? I mean, you hear the statement that you kind of led with, which was you will own nothing and be happy. I think you mentioned that. What does that mean about your physical assets? Are they going to seize your car, your house, your everything, or what?
Yeah. So that's the other thing that I didn't get to talk about yet is the Bank for International Settlements. They released in their annual report on July 20th, 2023, one chapter of their annual report that was called Blueprint for the New Monetary System. Their plan is to tokenize all assets on the global unified ledger. And they're very specific about that in this chapter of their annual report. They plan on having a global unified ledger. They've done some work like testing that and developing that through different projects that the Bank of International Settlements is working on. They have innovation hubs around the world. So they're building a global unified ledger. And they don't in their report, they talk about how information is siloed in different places. Now, we know that that protects us and if you put information all in one place, how hackable is that? How easy is that to control? They don't like that information is siloed in different places. So they anticipate that there will be local ledgers in each country and that each country would feed into the global unified ledger with APIs and such.
Wow.
They talk about this in their report. They talk about assigning a digital token to every piece of property, all of your assets, your car, your house, art, deposits can be tokenized. Any stocks, bonds, anything you own, any securities you own can be tokenized. Everything can be represented by a digital token, and those tokens could be bought and sold instantly, could be transferred instantly through the ledger system, through the digital ledger system. And they want a global unified ledger that would tie it all together. And in that way, they could control your assets. If your assets were tokenized on this ledger, you would lose control of them, and you could potentially lose them at that point if you're not behaving the way they want you to behave. The report also talks about how the programmable global unified ledger would have a data environment that would receive data from real world events. Now, what does that mean? We have phones that spy on us constantly. They're constantly being surveilled by our cell phones. If you were unfortunate enough to be in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, you could potentially lose your assets if they were tokenized on the global unified ledger. If the government didn't like that you were there, thought you were a threat, you could lose your assets. In Canada, with the trucker protests, people who supported the truckers saw their bank accounts seized. Well, that could have been so much more efficiently if your assets were tokenized. If your deposits were tokenized, you could lose your assets and your deposits, all of your money and your things. So that's definitely their plan. You can go online and read it. It's online on the Bank of International Settlements website. They're very open about it. And real world asset tokenization is a thing. It's a big push. I've heard experts say that by 2030, there could be 30 to 35 trillion worth of assets tokenized. Real world assets. They want to tokenize hectares of land, bodies of water, rainforests. They want to tokenize all these things so that they can be fractionalized and the interest can be sold and traded and such like that. And they claim it will help sustainability and it will help conservation and all these, big grand ideas. But it's really for control. And that's why I warn people, I don't want people to be lost because they're too tied to their money or their things. I can't tell you when to sell your things or if you should sell your things. Prayerfully, you should speak to, God about that and seek his guidance. And we know that we have that Bible verse that says, lay up your treasures in heaven. So I encourage people to do that, but also the longer you have your assets, the more you can be a blessing to others as well. So if you can use your assets for good, to do the work of Jesus, to be his hands and feet, as we head toward these these troubled times, we can really be a help to someone.
With these tokens that you're speaking about, what are some of the laws that they would have to put in place or bring in for them to be able to actually tokenize private property, or is there already a framework for that?
So I don't know. I have to look more into this Genius Act to see if it does touch on tokenization of actual assets. Right now, like as far as I've seen from what I've read, it's stablecoins.
Mm-hmm.
But they're going to. I could see that we would have further legislation coming around. I mean, President Trump, this was just one of his crypto bills that he wanted passed. He has a number of bills out there that he wants passed. I think another bill would probably come forward that would provide some regulation framework for asset tokenization. But certainly, this is where the finance industry is going. Finance writers in this industry are talking about how tokenization is the new rails of finance. They're all gleefully looking forward to it because it actually would provide a huge amount of convenience if you wanted to transfer property. It'd be hugely convenient. Right now, if you want to buy or sell your house, you have to go through a long closing, with all these documents and such. If you were able to just execute it just by hitting a button on your computer to transfer your property, is with smart contracts, as soon as the money hits the account, the property gets transferred instantaneously. It would be hugely convenient and just so efficient, reduce costs. It would be so beneficial in so many different scenarios. However, if it's in the hands of someone who wants control, and in light of Bible prophecy, we can see how that control will be exercised. In that way, it's not favorable. It's not so good. But the Bible predicts this will happen. So, you just have to prepare for these things.
So are there any legal protections or anything like that exists to help prevent the government just from freezing or taking someone's digital currency or anything like that?
No. Right now they could do it. They could do it if they suspected money laundering, any type of illicit, illegal activity.
Mhm.
They could freeze your coin. They could freeze your crypto. They could freeze these assets. In fact, the CEO of Tether, he has said that all transactions are online, all transactions are traceable, and they'll seize any asset that's involved in illegal activity. In fact, I believe that Tether onboarded the FBI and the Secret Service onto their platform. So if they determine any behavior to be illicit or illegal, they certainly can seize your coin related to that. The Department of Justice is one of the biggest holders of Bitcoin. I think they have I don't know how many Bitcoin they have, but they have a lot of Bitcoin. They're one of the largest holders of Bitcoin just because of all the wallets that they've seized in suspected illegal activity.
And how fast do people line up to give up their rights during COVID? All it takes is that one event where there's that fear, people will be lining up.
Well, a lot of what we're dealing with in the end is about fear. One of the things that's interesting when we talk about the mark of the beast is that we understand that it is worship on Sunday specifically that is going against God's law of worshiping on the seventh day and resting on the seventh day. If you wanted to keep track of the geolocation of every individual out there, it's pretty easy to do that now because everybody has a cell phone. But what we're talking about as far as the mark of the beast crisis is eventually there's going to be you have to rest on Sunday. And that in and of itself is not necessarily the mark of the beast because you're not worshiping. There's plenty of things that you can do that aren't, typical work that you would do on that day. But we know that the second stage will be you have to be in church and you have to worship on this day. So could it be as easy as tracking the geolocation on your phone? And if you're not there a certain number of Sundays at a specific location, boom, all your assets get frozen. How does this tie into the global surveillance state that we're heading towards?
Well, certainly they can do that now. I mean, your phones are trackable even when they're off.
Yeah.
They can follow your location. Even de-Googled phones can't protect you from that. So they can track us if we're tied to our phones, if we have them and we're using them, or even if they're off and they're in our possession, they can track us.
So how does this play into like the Amish or something like that, where they're, they don't use any technology, they don't use any cryptocurrency? Like, is there just going to be an exception that's like, oh, well, they can still use cash? Like,
I don't know how they're going to go through all this. I really don't. I guess they're going to use cash in their communities.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, eventually they'll all be assimilated.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the devil's ultimate desire is to get everybody crowded together in cities.
Exactly.
Because it's easier to control cities, actually.
Yes.
Ellen White talks about that. She also says that for fear of wanting food and clothing, she says they will join with the world in transgressing God's laws. So, there's going to be a lot of Seventh-day Adventists out there who perceive a threat. They don't have the faith to get them through. They don't have faith that God is going to provide food, whether it comes by a raven like it did for Elijah, or manna for the children of Israel. The children of Israel wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. And one of the things I often think about is manna is pretty impressive, but we also know that their clothing never wore out. Mm-hmm. Man, that's a miracle right there. Like clothing always wears out, right?
Yep.
And so there's this fear that their wants aren't going to be provided for. And because of that fear and the lack of faith and trust in God, they give up and they join the ranks of the opposition.
Yeah, I think maybe more to the point is that their wants are not their needs, right? Their needs will be provided for if they trust in the Lord, but their wants aren't going to be, And so many people are so comfortable, we are comfortable,
It's true.
You think people, I often think that people who are living in poorer countries now who receive the truth at the end time, they're going to actually be, it's going to be much easier for them because they don't have the quality of life, in terms of material things that we have, that we have to give up. And that's a real trap for a lot of people, unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, it really is. I think that a lot of people will not be prepared for that. I think a lot of people are not prepared to separate from their things, to give up their things.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people really like convenience, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And, it might serve us to dematerialize, to a certain extent. If you can, live more minimalistically, the less things you have when this time of trouble comes, the less you'll be tied to this, the less you'll be tempted to, worship the beast or anything such that. We love God. We want to be with God. We want to worship God.
Mm-hmm.
None of us should fall for this trap. None of us should be lost because we're tied to our money or things. But I fear that many people will be, which is why I try to warn people. I feel like if we can wrap our heads around what's coming and what they're doing with the financial system and how these changes are taking place and how it fits in with Bible prophecy, we can better prepare ourselves in prayer and with our relationship with Christ in order to be prepared spiritually, mentally, emotionally for these things.
Jesus kind of talks about this in Matthew 19:23 when he said unto his disciples, "Verily I say unto you that a rich man shall hardly enter into the kingdom of heaven. And again I say unto you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter in the kingdom of God."
Well, in the eye of the needle back then, I believe it was a gate, I think, that was like really low. It was something.
It's a very
like,
narrow gate.
Yeah.
very narrow gate. Yeah. And oftentimes the camel would have to get down on its knees to kind of go through it. And so it's like, so how does a rich man enter heaven? Down on his knees.
Wow. Yeah. And I think that should be one of our main takeaways from this is not the fear of losing our possessions, not the fear of economic collapse, civil war, a global pandemic, or whatever is going to trigger all this and put this into motion, but our trust, our relationship with God and how we're going to ultimately prepare for this. Because we know it's going to be hard. It's going to be like a time of that never has been before. And we can look back, like Alex said, is, how did God take care of Elijah? Well, he fed him. And how did God take care of his people during, the dark ages, during the 1260 years? He made a place for them in the wilderness. And I think that will be the same for us as well. And like you were talking about with the foraging, I think that's great. I think that will definitely be a huge role. And, I think God will also be, feeding us and possibly with ravens or, who knows what it will be. But I think the main takeaway is, to build that relationship with God, to trust him and to, spread this message as well to others so that this won't take anyone by surprise.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. We have a great opportunity to be a comfort to someone.
Yeah. And assets in it are not a bad thing, right? God has blessed us and we're to use those blessings for others. So we shouldn't look at that as a bad thing. The question is, don't get attached to those things above God. You have to be willing to give it all away, everything for him.
That's right. Because Jesus gave up everything for us. We should be willing to give up everything for him as well.
Absolutely.
Amen.
Yeah.
How often do we go through a mental checklist and be like, yep, I'm willing to give that up. Yep, I'm willing to give that up. But it's a lot easier to say you're willing to give something up than to actually go and like, okay, today's the day.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it makes me think of Moses, when he's going through the desert there with the Israelites. And initially, the opportunity came to the Israelites to hear from the voice of God himself. And they said, no, we don't want to hear. You speak to us. And then Moses had this beautiful relationship with God, in the midst of the fire and the lightning and the thunder. He was there sitting with the Creator and speaking face to face as a man speaks with his friend. And you see the change in the attitude of the Israelites compared to Moses. Moses never complained about the food that they ate in the desert for 40 years, whereas the Israelites complained. We don't have water, we don't have meat. And they were just always whinging and complaining because they wanted to fill their life with the things that were wants, and Moses filled his life with his time with God. And I think if we can do that too, if we can just actually spend time with God and fill our life with God-centered things, we're going to be, I think, much more prepared to let go of all the other things that don't matter, because God matters in the end here.
And it's looking forward with hope. We have a hope of salvation, a hope of eternal life with Christ. And we shouldn't ever look at the trials of this world as this great monumental mountain that can't be overcome. God saves us through the storm. He saved Noah in the ark through the storm, not from the storm, but through the storm. He saved the 3 Hebrew worthies in Daniel through the fiery furnace, not from it, but through it. And he stood right there in their midst as they were going through it. And so it's not something to be looking on with fear and trepidation and like, oh man, like I just hope that doesn't happen in my lifetime type thing. We know it's going to happen. And so the only way out is up. It's like you're deep underwater. The only way out is to swim to the surface type thing. And the way we do that is with a continual relationship, a trusting relationship where we build that trust with God. And then we don't have anything to be fearful of. What is that Bible verse that says perfect love drives out all fear? Is that right?
Casteth out all fear, yeah.
So that verse tells us that when we love God and we have that relationship, when we love him more and more and more, there's no fear there. So we're not facing this extreme situation that we know is going to come. It's been prophesied. We know, and we can see it starting to unfold. We can see it before our very eyes that this is going forward. But we don't look on it with fear. Instead, we just have a message to give to the world. We are watchmen, to watch it happen and to spread a message of hope to the rest of the world. Not one of fear, but of hope.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on with us. Thank you so much. Guys, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel so that you can stay up to date for upcoming episodes, and make sure that you're staying in the Word and reading of God continually. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you.